What's going on, everyone, and welcome to the Housing Provider Show. This is a very interesting episode. This is either going to be, depending on where you're watching or how you're watching it, the last episode of the Landlording Show or the first episode of the Housing Provider Show. And we're going to go into it, why we're changing the name, why we're changing sort of the outline of the show, and the way we're going to do the show. And honestly, the name change is something that we took a lot of time to think about and come up with, and that's the reasoning we're going to go behind. But since we're doing that already, we're going to take that and sort of change the show up and give you guys some better things coming forward. I want to introduce, I got my partner in crime here, Dave Bovin, who's going to be helping me out and producing the show. He'll be the guy that you hear in the background jumping in and keeping me on track. Dave, how's it going?
Good, Tim. How are you doing?
Doing good. Just wanted to make that introduction so you guys know who is the other voice that you're hearing. But today I want to talk about the crisis that we are in as investors. The news keeps on coming over and over and over again. The headlines keep on coming. The tenant groups, the unions of tenants, which I didn't even know was a thing 4 or 5 years ago, but now tenants are unionizing inside bigger buildings. There's a lot of outward pressure on us as landlords, on us as property investors. The world where property investors were looked at as an overall good thing is slowly going away because of ratings on TV, because of political figures trying to get more votes. And let's face it, if you are a landlord and you own a 4-unit building, you are 1 vote. Your tenants are 4 to 8 votes, depending on how many adults are living in each unit. So a lot of these groups are getting foothold. And today we're going to talk about that a little bit, of what they're doing, what's coming down the pipeline, at least in Illinois, at least in Chicago. And then we'll go into the whole name change and everything like that. But wanted to talk about some changes that we're seeing. So we've gotten a lot of laws recently that over the last year, I'll say, that have already negatively affected land. So going back to COVID, we can talk about the Fair Notice Act, where you have to give a tenant 120 days notice to vacate them or to raise their rent. Every day we're getting news articles about City Hall, about the aldermen going back and forth, trying to update the RLTO to give tenants more and more things that they're looking for. It's already 6 to 8 months to evict a tenant in Chicago, and it's only going to get worse. We had a little bit of some help with the fact that now for lawsuits, we no longer have to try to have the sheriff serve. We can start hiring that special process server right away. But at the end of the day, it's still a 6, 8, 10-month process sometimes to get a tenant out. And that's if everything goes right. The world right now is against landlords. And here's the thing. I'm a big believer that being a small mom and pop landlord is the greatest way to create a legacy of wealth for your family. It is one of those things that there are very few opportunities that you can get into with as little money as you need to get into real estate, and that you can continue to grow and keep growing and pass on to your kids and your grandkids, et cetera, to build generational wealth than real estate and investment properties.
You know, Tim, being that it is so important to a family legacy, as far as the nitty-gritty goes, with notice and requirements for periods of time, does tenancy duration play any factor into how much notice someone needs to give it?
Yeah, so the new law that I briefly mentioned, and just to clarify really quick, so in Chicago, if your tenant's been there for over 6 months, you have to give them 60 days notice to vacate. So if their lease is up, and this is also for increasing the rent. So you have to give them a 60-day notice that hey, I'm increasing your rent, or the term is over and you have to move out, or I don't want you there anymore. If they've been there more than 3 years, you have to give them 120 days notice. So anything under 6 months, if you found a renter that is living there for 2 months and is supposed to move out, give them a 30-day notice still. After 6 months, it's a 60-day notice. After 3 years, it's a 20-day notice. And that's just one example of a law that makes it harder for landlords. Another good one that recently has come up is the Northwest ordinance that is most of the Logan Square 606 area here in Chicago. That's basically saying if you're a landlord and you want to sell your property because of gentrification, because of the big corporation, and that's a big one we'll step into in a second. I didn't go there, Dave, but because of these big corporations and the negativity that landlords face, there's now a law around the 606, which is like Logan Square and Humboldt Park and Hermosa and things like that, where if you want to sell your building, you have to offer it to the tenants first before you can sell. And this is the way the law is written. This could hold up the sale and make the sale instead of a 2-month sale, a 6-month, 12-month sale and process to get these homes sold. So there's already been a lot of pushback from landlords on this. It's only been around a few months and it's already causing havoc in the market. And these are the things that we really, really need to band together as housing providers and fight.
Now, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a pilot program, right? Currently?
Yeah, so it's a pilot program, which is not good news. It just means that if they deem it as successful, that eventually it's going to expand further and further. Luckily, between the Realtor organization and MBOA and other organizations that landlords should be a part of, housing providers should be a part of, got it down and actually removed Pilsen. It was originally going to be Pilsen and the 606 area. Ended up just being the 606 area for now, but it is a pilot program, meaning that at some point they could vote and it could be across the entire city, making it almost impossible for an investor to cash out. There's a lot of reasons you might want to cash out. There's a lot of good reasons, a lot of bad reasons. And when I say bad, I mean just you don't have the money to continue to make fixes. This is something that we see in New York. The tenants' rights groups have gotten so aggressive and gotten so many laws passed that it's so hard for a landlord to make money that what they're doing is just sitting on the property and not making any fixes. And now these tenants are living in disarray. The house is a lot worse than it was because of these laws. So a lot of times everyone fights for the tenant laws, but they don't look at what actually happens. At the end of the day, when you charge a housing provider a fee, they're there to make a profit. And the only way they're going to make a profit is passing that fee on to the tenants.
Tim, there's one thing that I noticed that I'm wondering if it is strictly related to the TOP or if it's Chicago-wide, is that new owners must keep tenants for 180 days post-sale. Is that just within that jurisdiction or is that Chicago citywide?
Yeah, right now it's just that jurisdiction. But again, it's a pilot program that could go anywhere. And this is the issue that we're seeing and why I'm changing the name of the show, besides just a chance to restart, change the format, go over the format here in a second for you guys, because we got a lot of good shows coming up and we're really excited for it. So I want everyone to know what's going on. But what's happening is these tenant rights groups are winning the media. They are able to show how, maybe 1% of landlords are evil and use that to get laws that just don't make sense for the mom and pop landlords. The other issue is you do have some bad guys that are really, really big. Blackstone, for instance, is coming and buying up a lot of housing. These are the people that are going to be able to withstand all these laws and still have the money to hold on to the property until they're the ones left in the game. And then it's going to be basically they can charge whatever they want because they're going to be the only housing provider. So it's not going to be good for tenants. There's villages we've talked about. I've had other episodes where, Markham, for instance, is not even allowing people to rent their homes anymore. This is bad for landlords and tenants, but it's something that it's hard to fight as a landlord when the perceivance of being a landlord is you're this rich family that has enough money to have a second, third, fourth house. You are way well off. You don't need any of the rent to pay any of your bills or pay the mortgage. That's just what the media is portraying most of us as. And that is not true. Most landlords that we work with and most landlords that we talk to on a daily basis own one or two properties. Maybe they get to the point when they're retiring, they own a few more or a bigger property, etc. But they're doing it the right way. They're there to help families, to provide housing. But when the media is turning the word landlords into a negative, I really want to stress that we need to be there to fight that and show how landlords and housing providers, which is the new word I'm going to start using now, and why we're now calling this the Housing Provider Show. Housing providers need to be part of the community. Whether you are buying a property and hiring a property management company to run it, or you're self-managing, that property manager or you, if you're self-managing, need to be part of the community, need to attend the meetings, need to show how some of the laws that they are passing, and I'll give you an example, or some of the laws that are on the books that I'm going to give you an example of, are actually hurting tenants, and that you want a fair place for a tenant to leave. And we have to speak up when there are housing providers that are treating tenants unfair or that are being ridiculous and making us all look bad. We need to speak up on it. So one example, we just had an eviction where, the eviction took 8 to 10 months. Meanwhile, this is a 4-unit building. The tenant that we were evicting was harassing both sexually and physically other tenants in the building, in the laundry room, et cetera, making it unsafe for all of them, making them feel not at home, eventually forcing them to move out, because it was quicker for us to let them move out to get away from the situation than it was to get the eviction process through and get this tenant. So when things like that happen, it's not just, the rich landlords being affected. These things are affecting people who are renting their homes in these areas, in these apartments, just as much as the landlord. And we really want to shine a light on it. And that's what we hope to do. So going forward, I just want to briefly talk about what this show is going to be. We're still going to have interview shows, episodes where we're interviewing guests from around the city that are doing really cool things from around the country that can help you with your investment, make it more powerful, make it more passive for you. That is goal number one. So we are going to do those interviews on a good portion of the show. We're also going to do what I'm going to call solo shows, although now I do have Dave with me, so it won't just be me ranting, there'll be someone else to help me stay on pace and do all that. We're going to have, on those shows, when we don't have the interview, we're going to do it just like this, where we have a main topic that we're going to talk about for 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer if we need to. And then we're going to have a couple other segments that we want to bring to the thing and hopefully entertain you guys, hopefully give you guys some good information. And with that, I'm going to let Dave sort of kick us off with the first segment of this brand new podcast that is sort of a continuation of an old podcast, but also the start of a new one. So we're going to go from there.
All right, Tim, thank you. Now it's time for the segment called Chicago or. So this segment is going to focus on if a law comes from Chicago or another city within the United States. Today, we are doing New York. So is it a law in Chicago or New York? Tim, let me ask you this. To pay interest or not to pay interest, the law states in this area that landlords must keep the deposit in an interest-bearing bank account if 6+ units and tenants get the earnings annually minus a 1% administrative fee.
The biggest difference is Illinois actually is very similar to this law. So within there, we're talking about cities, I'm going to say it's a New York thing, because again, that sounds like Illinois' law, but Chicago's law is a little bit different. So first of all, is that the right reading?
Yes, you are correct. The 1% administrative fee is really the big difference.
Yeah, so that's something I've never heard of. And again, people talk about New York and California being far stricter than Chicago, and it actually scares a lot of Chicago investors, which is why we want to do this. There are a lot of tenant-friendly laws in Chicago, in Illinois, and that's the whole point of the first part of this episode. But there's other states that are a lot worse. There's other states that have issues similar to us. And another part of that is the crazy thing about it. All these super tenant-friendly places, when you start naming them off, you go Oregon, you go California, you go the DC area, New York, Washington State, things like that. Where's the most expensive real estate at? Where is the real estate that when you buy, it's going to appreciate the actual places people want to live? So some of that does make sense. Why some tenant-friendly land, tenant-friendly rules and regulations do help, but there has to be a gray area, and that's what we want to talk about more. So real quick, just to go over, that's the New York law. Let's just touch base on the Chicago law. If you take a security deposit, you have to hold it in a separate account for that tenant. You have to make sure that you're paying interest on the 1 year anniversary every year that they stay there. You have to pay them interest. They set that interest rate generally in January or late December every year. It's currently 0.01%. So on a $1,000 security deposit, you got to pay the tenant 10 cents every year. Now, here's the crazy thing. If you miss that payment, or if when a tenant moves out and you go to use that security deposit to pay for certain damages, there's a whole lot of trouble you can get into if you try to apply it to something that can be considered wear and tear. You try to apply it wrong. If you don't give them the invoices and the estimates within a certain amount of time, and if you don't give them the rest of the security deposit back within a certain amount of time, you can be held liable for 3x that security deposit plus attorney fees. And it is one of the biggest, easiest slam dunks attorneys have is when they sue landlords for security deposits, because 90% of the time, there's so many little parts of this law that if you mess up one little thing, now you owe 6, 7, 8 grand easily. And you just lost, pretty much all the money you made that year for the rental. So
being a property manager and landlord yourself, what do you recommend as far as security deposits go? Do you recommend taking them, or do you moving fee?
So right now, I prefer moving fee. The reason I say right now, and going back to the topic of the day, is something that the aldermen in Chicago are talking about on a weekly basis, and the state of Illinois as well, is considering move-in fees a junk fee and figuring out a way to completely ban them or to regulate them very heavily. So as of right now, the only regulation inside of Chicago is that it can't be more than half a month and it has to be non-refundable, etc. But there's just too many pitfalls that you can have where, with the exception of a tenant not paying rent and moving out early, the odds of you keeping a security deposit is very little, and it doesn't really get what it used to for. So right now, move-in fee. The other option, which I'm hoping will eventually become a better option, right now I would say if you're in A or B class, this is something I would do. If you're in C or D class, it doesn't really work, is security deposit alternatives. So there are companies out there, they're mostly insurance companies basically, that you pay a month, the tenant pays a monthly fee to them, and if something was to happen, they would cover a month or 2 months rent as a security deposit. This gets around a lot of the security deposit laws. The problem is their insurance. If you're renting in a C or D class area and your tenants have a 550 credit score, they probably don't want to insure that. They want to insure the people that are 650, 700 credit scores and make 200 grand a year, because that's less likely that they're going to default. So it's not a perfect solution, but I'm hoping one day soon it does get there.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Tim.
Yeah. The other segment that we wanted to do was just this is going to be hard to get through and continue to do that with the name of the show and with what I want to start calling us as housing providers. But I want to do the housing provider tip of the day. And Dave, I'll go back to you for that as well.
All right. So for the tip of the day, Tim, I believe we just kind of covered it, because we're talking about security deposits and what you recommend as a property manager in the area. Do you have any additional tips other than if you are going to provide a security deposit?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the way to get around all of this and make sure you're good is good screening. So the more and more they're going to regulate security deposits, regulate move-in fees, the more and more important it's going to be to properly screen. And it's more and more important to me to have a good property management company that may be offering something like a rent guarantee or a tenant placement guarantee, where if that tenant does stop paying rent, etc., then you have some kind of guarantee there. So be on the lookout for that if you're not self-managing. If you're self-managing, make sure that you're doing the appropriate things to make sure you're getting good tenants. It might mean that you are vacant for 6 weeks instead of 2, but it is way better to be vacant an extra month to find the right tenant than to approve the wrong tenant and have to go through an 8 to 10 month eviction where you're not making any money and they're destroying the home.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I heard you briefly mention before, but I would like to just kind of dive a little deeper into so our listeners understand. When they are doing a move-in fee, if they opt to do that rather than a security deposit, what exactly are the rules again? How much can that?
Yeah, so in Chicago, it can be up to half of the rent. It has to be non-refundable. Now, if you're in Cook County, and Chicago is trying to pass a law similar, so we'll see if it happens. For Cook County currently, it has to be itemized, meaning if you have a move-in fee, you have to be able to itemize what that fee covers. So we paid a maid service to come in and clean. We had to change the locks for you, etc. All those things need to be itemized and shown to the tenant so that way you're justifying that these are actual hard costs that you paid when you're charging this. And then the last segment I want to do before we click off is sort of just a news story and talk about it. But there is a tenants group in Pilsen neighborhood that are actually suing their landlord right now. The residents of a 6-unit building had lawfully withheld a portion of rent after their landlord allegedly failed to make necessary repairs within a legal stipulated 14-day period. While the repairs were eventually completed, the landlord then demanded the previously withheld rent along with late fees. Shortly after, the tenants were served with substantial rent increases ranging from 26% to 55%. Viewing these hikes as a form of retaliation, the tenants represented by the Law Center for Better Housing negotiated a settlement. The agreement saw the eviction proceedings drop and the outstanding rent and fees waived, but ultimately tenants still had to vacate. So this is what I was talking about. A couple of different things I want to talk about here, but one is when landlords make housing providers look bad. This is why, and the news is going to run with this, and this is what's going to get news views. And so I understand why they run with this, right? I understand that if I'm ABC7, put this on Facebook, I'm going to get 1,000 clicks on it versus probably 1 million clicks, who knows, for them. But, you're going to get a lot more clicks on something like that than you are, a landlord collects money and was able to do it. So I get why they run it, and I get that it's all about money. It's all about getting views and things like that. But this is something where the landlord is clearly in the wrong. And because of that, these are the stories that tenants use when they're talking to our aldermen, when they're talking to our state senators and even national senators. They use these examples to show this is why we need these laws. This is why we need to make it harder to do X, Y, Z, because there's people out here like this. First of all, you need to be able to make the repairs. For the most part, you should be either making the repairs or letting them out of the lease. And here's something that what a lot of tenants don't realize on this is if you don't make the repairs in 14 days, they have the right to withhold the rent or withhold the part of the rent that would cost to do the repairs. Now, they can do two things with that. They can either pay for the repairs to be done and provide receipts to the landlord, or they can hold on to it in a separate account for when the landlord does fix it, they then have to pay the landlord. The problem with these tenants and what they did wrong is it seems like they said, hey, we're not paying rent now, we're all out together, we're not going to pay the rent, and when you fix it, we're still not going to pay the rent because we already spent it and we went out Friday night. So that's where they're wrong. But now with this landlord, another one, and it sounds like, this landlord has a few different properties just by, having an LLC name and stuff like that. They might be a bigger landlord, but here's where they went wrong. Illinois just recently passed a retaliation law. Chicago's had it forever. But as a landlord, you need to document why and how you are going to do price increases and rent increases for all your tenants. Because if you raise the rent on Dave 30%, but you only raised Tim rents 10%, and you can't show in your SOP why you did that and how you consistently do that, you're opening yourself up for a huge lawsuit and a huge retaliation fees and court fees and all this stuff that they're going to win easily. So I'll give this as a second landlord tip because it goes into this story. You need to have an SOP for your properties. And if you have multiple properties across the state, you need to make sure those SOPs are consistent, meaning you can't raise rent one way in X neighborhood or for a tenant that might be African American or Latino and then raise rent in a different area for a tenant that may be Caucasian in a different manner. Now, you're going to ask me probably, but what about where the properties are? Like, one area might have a higher appreciation. In that case, your SOP needs to read, for every tenant, we are going to look at comps and see what the market rate is. From there, we are going to take X formula and add X amount for every violation that they had of the lease. Add X amount for every late fee that they incurred every time they were late. Things like that you could do. You can have a SOP that's not number based, but is the SOP. The first part is we're going to look at the comps. And then all you have to do now here's the big part. You actually have to do that. You can't just say that's my SOP and then pick a really, a random number and say, all right, that's it. You should have it documented that, hey, these are the comps. Down the street rented for $1,200. This one rented for $1,300. Mine's at $1,000, so I'm going to raise it to $1,300 because that's the highest comp. Whatever your SOP is, you have to stick to it. You have to document it. And that is going to be the best way to stay out of trouble when it comes to this new retaliation law in Illinois. And again, this law has been around Chicago for a while. We need to stay away from it by documenting everything, because I don't know the whole story, but what if these tenants, let's say this guy just bought the property. I'm pretty sure this is not the story, but let's say it was. The guy just bought the property and the rents were $800 a piece, but market rent is $1,600. Going up 55% isn't that big of an increase. But if he doesn't have an SOP for that, if he can't show why he's doing it, it's going to look like retaliation, especially when something like this happens. So that's the story of the day. That is how we're going to wrap up the show. And I want to thank you guys for listening, for everyone that was listening to the Landlording Show. And I hope that we can get your continued support on the Housing Provider Show. A couple things for you guys as listeners. We want your questions. If you guys can comment questions below, however you guys are listening to this, whether it's on YouTube or if you're seeing this on Spotify or Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, whatever it's called, please send us questions below. Comment below with some questions that you want us to answer, because we'll start to answer questions on the show during segments, etc., from our listeners. Also, be on the lookout. We're going to start producing more and more content that we're throwing on our YouTube page, different videos, how to buy rentals, how to run rentals, all that stuff, market updates, all that. Be on the lookout. This is all coming soon to you guys on our YouTube channel, which is Chicago Style MGMT. Look us up, subscribe. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming.